everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is my annual horror movie year in review, where I rank all the horror movies I've seen throughout the year into one tier list. For the purposes of this video, I'm counting movies whose release in the United States was in 2025, so some of these foreign movies came out in prior years in their home country, but they will count for 2025 horror movies since that is when I had the chance to see them. I've watched 37 new horror movies this year, a respectable amount I hope, and should make this a lengthy video. I also just want to say there's nothing more boring to me than the debate on whether a movie is truly a horror movie or not. I have a broad definition of what constitutes a horror movie, and that will be reflected in my list. So with that all said, let's get into it. Let's rank all the 2025 horror movies I've seen. So we're going to be starting here with Grafted, a New Zealand horror film, body horror, directed by Sasha Rainbow. I'm going to be putting this into the C tier. Now this is a pretty pleasantly surprising horror film that was released in 2025 on Shudder. There is certainly some limitations to the film due to its budget, due to some of the acting limitations. It doesn't have the best actors, but they do a good enough job, and the direction is pretty solid for being a kind of an early film for Sasha Rainbow. And this is a horror movie that, in my opinion, really deals with some serious themes in a way that is fun, but also takes it seriously. So it's definitely a kind of goopy, gross body horror movie, but it also has this coming-of-age story that is interesting and deals with some interesting elements of New Zealand society in the modern day. So I think this is a really smart, fun little horror movie that has the potential, like I said in my review, that it could be a future cult classic. I definitely believe that. But for me, I'm putting it in the C tier. It's definitely, like I said, it's a cult classic for a reason, not just a regular one. And that's because I could see it getting its fans, but at the same time, there is some serious problems that kind of hold it back from greatness. But I definitely will be keeping an eye out for future films from Sasha Rainbow, because this was a really promising film within the genre. Next up, we have Wolfman, directed by Leigh Whannell, and this was the first major disappointment of the new year for me. I went to the theaters to see it. I was very excited. I'm going to put it into the F tier because I was so disappointed by it, and it didn't live up to any of the expectations that I had placed onto it. You have something like Invisible Man, which Whannell made, which was a very smart and clever and scary film that dealt with serious issues and really reinvigorated the Universal Monster name after so many attempts to rebrand it as an action franchise. It was a sort of back-to-basics horror movie that was really well executed, in my opinion. Unfortunately, we then get Wolfman, which was... There was a lot of incarnations for this movie. Ryan Gosling was at one point attached to star in the movie. Instead, we ended up getting Christopher Abbott, Julia Garner, and Matilda Firth. This is a movie that has some strong actors in it. Julia Garner, I thought, did a very good job. And there is some cool moments with the body horror and with the werewolf vision. But it all just leads to this very painfully boring and generic horror movie that isn't scary, emotionally effective, or thematically deep. It took everything that worked with Invisible Man and just made it much flatter and more boring and so predictable and stupid. It became this really generic generational trauma storyline that just tells you all the themes through the dialogue, as opposed to just showing things and having it be understood by the audience. There was no faith in the audience whatsoever to understand the so-called thematic depth of the movie, so that was definitely one of the first major disappointments of the year for me, as I was really hoping to love it. I love the work of Leigh Whannell and James Wan, but he really did disappoint me with that. So we have Hard Eyes coming up, and I'm going to put that into the B tier, and this was another pleasant surprise for me. Hard Eyes to me is a cute, fun, rom-com horror movie with some good kills. It's a nice little themed slasher with heart and humor. It's not anything too heavy or brutal, it's just a good fun horror movie with good direction by Josh Rubin. Now Josh Rubin's someone that I grew up watching in his college humor days, but I didn't realize he had gone into directing, so when I saw this, I was just so happy to realize that this was the same guy, and I was really impressed by a lot of the things that he was doing. He really does have an understanding of the genre, and he knows how to deliver on just making an entertaining slasher movie. And I love the mixture of rom-com and horror. I think that's something that is sort of an unexplored angle, but there's definitely been some pretty solid entries now within that sort of very niche subgenre, and I think this is a very solid example of what is possible when you mix genres like this that don't usually or commonly get seen together. So I just absolutely adore this movie. It's not going to be like one of the horror movies of the year, but it's just a really fun and enjoyable time at the theater, which I definitely am glad I went and saw. Next up is the very polarizing Osgood Perkins horror comedy film The Monkey, which I have a pretty boring take on, and that's that I'm going to be putting it into the C tier. I didn't hate it or love it, but there was a lot of aspects that I thought were strong. I thought there was some funny moments and some clever and cool kill concepts and everything like that, but just the execution was maddeningly annoying because of the over-reliance on CGI, which really did kind of ruin the movie from realizing its full potential. But then also it was just sort of tonally kind of weird and didn't really work with whatever Perkins was trying to do. I get it was trying to be this really bleakly funny movie, and there was some hilarious moments in it for sure, and some of the kills were great, but it was also, it just kind of felt like he was just banging on the same exact thing. He just kept hitting the same note on the piano, no differentiation, no ability to appreciate the humor, because it just kept stacking on top of each other, and I was just getting more and more annoyed with the CGI. Now that being said though, it still is a pretty good movie with some good moments here and there, so it's not like a terrible film. It's just sort of right, and it's just sort of gets stuck in the C tier, because I do think there is a lot of strengths with Perkins' direction here that can't be overlooked, and I have to be able to appreciate those while understanding that it didn't live up to its potential. But it's not like something with Wolfman, where there wasn't really anything that was strong enough to get it out of the bottom tier, but instead it's just a film that was close to being great, but was unable to execute fully and realize the vision that it could have had that would have made it a much better film. So it's a C tier to me, and as a major Osgood Perkins fan, the fact that The Monkey ends up in the C tier is definitely a bit of a disappointment for me, as I was really looking forward to that movie. Next up, we have David Cronenberg's The Shrouds, a film I went to the theaters to see. It's a film that I've definitely had sort of yo-yoing opinions of. I'm putting it into the B tier. When I first saw it, I really did love it. The more I think about it or don't think about it, the more I realize it kind of is a bit of a mess of a movie that doesn't really it's not fully satisfying, because it doesn't feel like a movie. It feels like a miniseries, which I know it originally was supposed to be a show for Netflix, and it just feels like an expanded pilot that just doesn't really go anywhere. But nonetheless, Cronenberg is still the king of these types of movies, and it's funny as hell and weird in all the right ways. So like I said, it's a bit of a mess, and it's not tightly made or well crafted, as it feels like half of a TV show, but what we got I still did love, and so for that reason the film deserves to be into the B tier. Next up, we have the Norwegian body horror comedy The Ugly Stepsister. This is a film that I was very impressed by. It sort of is a reimagining of the Cinderella fairy tale. I'm going to put it into the A tier because it absolutely is one of the top horror movies of the year. Emily Blickfeld does a really good job with this horror movie. It's a smart reimagining of the classic fairy tale that has some truly brutal moments, great twists, and filled with very dark humor that lands, for me at least. And I am definitely very impressed by it, and I recommend any horror movie fan to definitely track down this movie and watch it. You will not regret it. Next up, we have Final Destination Bloodlines, the long-awaited sequel to the franchise that was really big in the 2000s. I'm going to put this in the B tier. It's just a really clever and fun movie with some great kills that, like The Monkey, also suffers from just an over-reliance on CGI for these kills, and it just makes these really well-planned out death scenes not land as well. There could have been way more iconic moments, and there was some truly great kills in this film. I'm not disputing that, but there could have been even more if it didn't insist on doing everything so CGI heavy. With a film like this, you just really have to lean on practical effects, in my opinion. But there was still some fun kills, an absolutely great opening. It was very fast-paced and well-edited. It just moves along really nicely, has some fun characters that we like to watch die, and just everything about it. It was just a nice little clever horror film that I definitely think was a worthy sequel to a legendary franchise. Next up, we have Sinners, which was definitely one of the best horror films of the year. It's definitely one that's been much talked about. It's probably the biggest, one of the biggest, if not the biggest, original sort of movie that came out this year, and it's definitely worthy of a lot of the praise that it's getting. I'm putting it into the A tier because I loved it as well, despite some small criticisms. I mean, there's some overwhelming positives, such as just an awesome historical drama with great production design, great costuming, great actors, great direction. The only major problem I have with the movie is with some of the vampire stuff. But look, this is a really strong allegorical drama with interesting characters and efficient storytelling. That's a lot of fun, and so I definitely would put it into the A tier, despite having some problems with the horror elements of the story, especially as we get towards the end of the movie. I didn't think it went in as satisfying of a way as it could have, and I think that a lot of that stuff kind of just felt taken out of something like From Dusk Till Dawn, which was a much noted sort of thing, but it's also not simply reductive to, like, that's way too reductive to just say it's From Dusk Till Dawn, because it is way too smart and clever and original of a movie to completely dismiss it, but it's also definitely taking from genre trappings as well. So it's this weird mishmash that I think works very well, and like I said, small critiques, but I think it's definitely worthy of a lot of the praise that it's getting, and it deserves all the love and all the money that's made. It's a great movie, and I really did enjoy watching it. So in my opinion, it definitely deserves the A tier. So now we're moving on to Bring Her Back, which was a movie that just left me floored in the movie theater. It's such a bleak and brutal movie, and I love it so much. I'm putting it into the S tier. It's like the exact ideal of what I want a horror movie to be. It spoke to me in such a deep way, and I was just blown away because the Philippo brothers, I thought that they did a good, Talk to Me was a solid debut from them, but I was never expecting them to take it to this level with their second film, and this is one that really just nails so many elements that there's not really a lot of space to critique it for me. It felt like almost a spiritual successor to one of my favorite horror movies of all time, Martyrs, and just like the best of those types of movies. That's what it felt like, but it felt more heartfelt, uncomfortable, brutal, scary, and bleak than even the best of those films. So it really does mirror like Martyrs in a way, but just taking it from a very different perspective. And I love that there's so many weird little tangential stuff in the story that they don't feel the need to explain them super in depth, like the video and exactly how all the supernatural process works. You kind of get the understanding just from the story itself. So there's just so much about this that I love. It's such a bleak and brutal, demoralizing story that just makes you feel horrible, and it's like a punch to the gut repeatedly, and you just constantly are feeling uncomfortable and uneasy the whole runtime. But that's what makes it so good and makes it such a unique experience. So many horror movies nowadays don't go as far as this movie's willing to on an emotionally draining level, that it's, in my opinion, just a masterpiece, and definitely one that's worthy of the S tier. And I keep bringing up Martyrs because I think that that's a very sort of similar film stylistically, but this one I feel like just does it in a completely new and fresh way, that it doesn't feel like you're just being a derivative example of sort of torture porn or whatever you want to call it. It's like it takes those sort of torture porn movies, you take the best of the bleak and brutalist stuff that you can imagine, that willingness to push the envelope beyond what is socially acceptable, way beyond, but then you also mix that with the uncomfortable feeling of those slow burn A24 style horror movies that we get with like Hereditary and Black Coat's Daughter, and you just mix those two things up and you really get something that is like the golden egg. It's like the film that is unbelievable to me, one that I can't stop thinking about, and one that has stuck with me all these months after seeing it in the theater. Sally Hawkins' performance is masterful, and the Philippo brothers, I am now fans for life of their work, because like I said, it resonates so deeply with me and what I want out of a horror movie, to be able to get so many of the things that I like and to get it in such a brutal and unrelenting package that I was able to see in the theaters is something I will not forget, and I appreciate very much what the Philippo brothers were able to do with this movie. So this is a huge thumbs up, definitely worthy of the S tier, and we can now move on. Next up is another brutal and bleak horror movie that I was very impressed by. We have The Long Walk, based on a Stephen King story. This was directed by Francis Lawrence. I'm going to put this into the A tier. This was a movie that definitely impressed me. I was intrigued by the trailer for the film, and so I had to go and see this one in the theaters. And it was brutal and bleak with some great social commentary and themes that were incorporated well, some good performances that bring true character to the story. And it's just a very smart and straightforward film that doesn't hide any tricks. It's exactly as brutal as you would expect, and it's just a very well told story that has a sort of gut punch of an ending. This isn't one I'm going to talk as much about as Bring Her Back. I'm not going to just talk in circles again, but this was a film that I was very impressed by. It's a very efficient, lean movie that I definitely recommend horror movie fans and Stephen King fans watch if you haven't already. I know it kind of didn't perform that well at the box office, but it's one that in my opinion should have performed better. Now I'm going to move on to 28 Years Later, a very highly anticipated sequel from Danny Boyle. This is a film that impressed me very much, and I'm going to be putting it into the S tier. This is a film that really did feel like a natural sequel that you could expect. It's one that really was smart and clever in the way it was written and directed, the way they explored this world that they had set up in the original, which is one of my favorite horror movies of the 2000s, and we get some really awesome performances. We have a very strong emotional core that was a bit unexpected, and I think that's maybe why this movie is a bit polarizing to some people, is they weren't expecting the film to not necessarily be about just the zombies, but about sort of death and grief and overcoming all these things and coming of age. So there's a lot of that stuff that works very well, but then there's also awesome zombie action as well, and just in general, the world just felt like, okay, this makes sense. This is a smart exploration not only of the development of the concept that they had in the original film, but also exploring modern British society in a post-Brexit landscape. It's sort of looking at it, we first had kind of like the war on terror, the 9/11 age that we kind of had in 28 Days Later, and all those anxieties that were festering in that time period. And now we have some really great incorporation of themes and commentary that's relevant to modern day Britain, and I thought that was really smart writing, and I think in general this is just a very beautiful film that was shot by Danny Boyle with iPhones, of course everybody knows that, but it really is beautiful in a way that the original was beautiful too, but it always had that disgusting sort of digital camera look that made it so iconic. But this one just looks beautiful and has like, good enough camera work that you aren't like kind of turned off by it a little bit. So this is just a film that really did impress me, and I'm very much looking forward to the sequel coming out next year. Next up, we have yet another body horror film, Together. This one I'm going to be putting into the C tier. This is a film that is definitely a mixed bag to me. I believe that there was some solid acting for sure in the movie, and that's definitely something that carries it, but it also is kind of a very generic horror movie. It feels like a repetition of so many other elevated horror movies that we've seen before, but also mixing in generic body horror. So it feels like, why are you just making the same damn movies over and over again? You're not unique by just making the same generic horror movie, but they all want to feel like they're elevated or above other horror movies, but it just doesn't. It's not good enough. It's not clever enough. It's stuff we've seen before. The thing that really keeps the movie together is the strong performances and some admittedly pretty funny moments with the kind of goopy, uncomfortable body horror, but the film was really held back by its generic direction and storytelling. So definitely hats off to Dave Franco and Alison Brie, but a bit of marks down for the writing and the direction, which just feel painfully generic and like something I've seen a million times over. And we really are starting to see lots of these body horror movies that kind of fall into the same sort of category of pretentious wannabe elevated horror, but just can't land that in any serious way. Next up, we have The Woman in the Yard. This was a Blumhouse horror movie. It's one that was very unimpressive to me and will be put into the very deserving F tier. It's a film that tries to rely on an emotional core about family, but that emotional core doesn't work, and it just feels like a cheap trick of a horror movie with nothing that really lands and no stakes to care about, and it just is a painfully generic and boring horror movie that I don't have much to say about. Next up, we have the Australian horror movie by Sean Byrne, Dangerous Animals. This is a shark horror movie, one that I was pretty impressed by. I'm going to put it into the A tier. Not one I was expecting going into it, that it was going to be this amazing movie, but I really do think it delivered with smart writing, good performances, brutal deaths, and intense survival sequences. And you also have an emotional core that you care about with a sort of romantic plot that I think works well. Hassie Harrison and Jay Courtney, Josh Houston, like all the performances are good, and I think Courtney in particular is just this unhinged villain that is really fun to watch while also just being kind of a pathetic guy. So I really do like this movie, and it feels like a smart, original, new exploration of some of the themes Byrne was exploring in his earlier films. It feels like one of those kind of unhinged Australian horror movies we would get in the 2000s, but with a modern sort of take on it that I really did appreciate and like. So Dangerous Animals definitely worthy of the A tier. So now we'll be moving on to Weapons, which was one of the most discussed horror movies of the year, one that has been debated online and has a lot of sort of buzz around it. There was a lot of love for this movie. Weapons, directed by Zach Cregger, in my opinion, is worthy of the B tier. That's because I have some mixed feelings, but what works about it works so well that I can't completely penalize the movie. So first of all, I want to say that there is an uneven tone that struggles to balance comedy and horror, but nonetheless there is some really great moments of humor in this movie, especially sort of that final chase sequence is so damn funny, and just genuine laugh out loud moments with just enough mystery to intrigue you, that this is a film that is still really good, but just feels like, man, it could have been great. And that's the thing that's kind of, it feels a bit disappointing or like a mixed feelings, because I do feel like Cregger left a lot of meat on the bone. There was a lot there. And we do get really good performances by Julia Garner, Josh Brolin, Alden Ehrenreich. Like, there's just a lot of great humor in this. And as a comedy, it works really well. But it also is trying to be like this mystery horror movie at the same time. And those elements, to me, don't work as well, though there is maybe some potential for them to be explored better. I just think it's kind of this weird movie that, to me, is really enjoyable, and Zach Cregger is a director that is really moving up in the ranks of horror movie directors, because Barbarian was excellent, and then this is another solid, good horror movie, but it's one that did leave me wanting more, and that's why I can only get into the B tier, but it is still worthy of getting a lot of praise. So it's a weird movie, but it's one that I do appreciate. I'm glad Julia Garner was able to be in a good horror movie, because she's absolutely worthy of it. She's been giving really good performances in horror movies for years, and she's finally getting in one that is worthy of her talents. So next up we have Rosario. This was a horror film that I didn't really hear a lot of people talking about, and probably for good reason. I'm going to be putting it into the F tier. It's a lower budget sort of film that, to me, there was a lot of heart obviously being put into it. I feel like the director cared about this movie, but nonetheless it still falls apart with the inability to deliver on any of the horror. There were some interesting ideas and concepts, but it all just lands flat with poor execution. I would just say to Felipe Vargas that you just gotta keep trying, and maybe when you have a bigger budget, a better film could be delivered, but this just wasn't it. And to be honest, I don't think that just having David Dastmalchian is going to be enough to sort of save your movie. The rest of the acting was a bit not great, to be honest, and I think that's also what hurts this movie. But there is some heart there, and there's some things there to work on that I think a better horror film could be made. Next up, we have Brian Bertino's film Vicious. This was a film that is not great, but I'm going to put it in the D tier, and I'll explain why. I think most people probably didn't really like this movie that much, but to me, I'm first of all a fan of Bertino's work, and I also like Dakota Fanning, and I think that she gives a good central performance in this, and there is some clever twists, but the film does ultimately fall flat with not enough interesting places to go, and it's not scary or emotional enough to carry us through the runtime. So it's a film that I think had some potential. I think the concept was interesting, but to be honest, it doesn't make you care enough about the character, and there's not enough scary moments to really get us to care too much about this or have this be a movie with a lasting impact. So even though I do like Brian Bertino, I think this is not a great movie, and in my opinion, D tier is kind of being generous, but I do think there's enough there to get it just above the F tier in my opinion, so D tier for vicious. Next up, we have Companion. This is a movie that stars Sophie Thatcher, who's kind of a rising star in the genre. I'm going to put it in the C tier. It's sort of hovering between the C and the D. And to be honest with you, this is a film that also kind of feels like it wants to be like this elevated horror movie or this elevated genre film and wants to say something, but ultimately suffers from generic storytelling and not really anything that interesting to say. So I think this is a film that has kind of done, like, it's going through well-trodden paths, right? A lot of this stuff that's been said in this movie has already been said and done before, but in more interesting ways. Thankfully for this movie, they have Sophie Thatcher, who does a really good job in my opinion. Jack Quaid is also solid in this movie, and there's some really funny moments here and there that help elevate it above just being a painfully generic movie. But the generic sort of storytelling and the instincts that make this sort of another one of those fake pretentious horror movies that I've been talking about, it makes it kind of suffer a little bit, and that's why it goes into the C tier. So it's a movie that is kind of a mixed bag. There's a lot of love for this movie online, and I can understand where they're coming from, but to me, it just doesn't feel that interesting. And despite having a really good performance from Sophie Thatcher, that's not enough to make a great movie on its own. The direction and writing needs to be a little bit better, and I think that, I really hope she continues to be in these types of movies because she does a great job in them, but this isn't her best film for sure. Next up, we have the final entry in the mainline franchise for The Conjuring, a movie that I was cautiously optimistic for, but unfortunately I'm going to have to put it into the D tier. Michael Chavez was brought back, and that's a big reason why the optimism was very cautious and very tempered, and there is some good emotional moments, some unhinged Conjuring-esque moments, but they all just feel a bit flat and disappointing. Though it is a better send-off than I was expecting, it's not anything amazing or worthy of the first two films. It's really carried again by the cast. Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga are just so damn likable, and they really feel like a real couple that you care about. And the daughter and that whole thing, that was great and everything, but it just fell flat, and it just is such a shadow of its former self that I can't do anything but put it into the D tier. It's lucky that it even gets that, to be honest, because it is just disappointing what's happened to this franchise when you have two really good entries and then James Wan moves on from directing them. And I just wish they had gotten somebody better than Michael Chavez, who has grown as a director, admittedly, but not enough to really be able to elevate this stuff beyond the most generic, jump scare laden horror movie style film. So that's why this is worthy of the D tier, unfortunately. Next up, we have the Irish folk horror film Frewaka, which is a movie that definitely has some pretty grand ambitions, but unfortunately is unable to deliver on them, so I have to put the film into the D tier. Now, this is a movie that I wanted to like more than I did, but unfortunately it just went nowhere. It's just a slow burn that kind of faded out. Clearly, Aslan Clarke, the director, wants to talk about and explore so much about the way that women are treated in this society and things like that, and that's all great, but she kind of just leaves it all at a surface level and leads to a kind of generic ending. It's a film with lots of potential, and I liked what I saw here at lots of different points, but it all ended up as less than the sum of its parts, and I find that a bit disappointing as a fan of folk horror myself. So this is a movie that is also getting a lot of praise online, but in my opinion, it never really moves beyond a very surface level, generic slow burn that goes nowhere style approach, which I think is the wrong approach to take for folk horror. I think you need to deliver on some really good, scary moments, which this film's never able to do. It just constantly is teasing us, which I think makes this movie worthy of the D tier, but I would definitely say there's a lot of potential for Clarke to make a much better horror film in the future. Next up, we have the dreaded The Strangers Chapter 2, directed by Rennie Harlin. This is part 2 of a trilogy that's already been all filmed. I absolutely hated the first movie, and this one somehow was even worse. This is a embarrassment of a horror movie. Rennie Harlin is such a hack, and it's such a boring movie with such boring filmmaking. I don't know how it turns a movie that's basically just an extended stalk and chase sequence into such a snooze fest with such embarrassingly bad CGI and needless background details on the strangers. And in general, it just shows Harlan's complete lack of understanding of what made the original concept so interesting. He just kind of throws it all away for this really painfully boring and stupid horror movie that I hate so much. Even though I think Madeline Petch is solid and she's trying her best, it just doesn't matter because this movie is so dumb, and I feel like I get dumber when I try and critique this movie because it's such a worthless pile of you know what. So F tier, and I think that's even being generous because I don't know why I keep watching these movies and doing this to myself, because these movies are painfully frustrating as a fan of horror. Next up, we have Witchboard, which was a remake of a classic 80s horror movie, I guess. I've never seen that, and I absolutely hated it as well. This is another just really piss poor film. I mean, just direction was terrible by Chuck Russell. So I never saw the original, but this is just plain awful. Bad casting and bad writing and bad directing, and it's a boring film with no redeeming qualities. And it's one of the worst horror movies of the year by far, and is completely worthy of being in the F tier. It's a complete embarrassment, and I really did not like this movie, and it was a waste of my time watching it, honestly. Next up is Megan 2.0, which was yet another flop for Blumhouse, who is kind of in this weird stage of their development with Jason Blum just kind of making bad decisions consistently now, which is kind of frustrating as someone who does appreciate what they make in the horror genre and a lot of the filmmakers that they're able to give opportunities to. But Megan 2.0 is just not a very good movie and was another sort of indication of some of the poor planning and poor understanding and self-awareness of your own brand. They really did think that Megan could do anything and they would be fine. So it's just a complete overinflated sense of what the source material was, and that's been pointed out elsewhere. That's not an original point, but this movie really is just a dumb, pointless movie that's painful to watch and shows, like I said, a continued lack of proper judgment that has defined recent Blumhouse endeavors. So yeah, it's a flop. It's a movie that's probably going to just be forgotten about. I know there's some fans of it. There's fans of the original. I never really was a huge fan of the original, but this film is even worse. So yeah, it's just not a movie that I think works very well, and just kind of felt like stupid and pointless, and it was just a waste of time as well. So that one is going into the F tier as well. Next up, we have Bone Lake, an erotic thriller that's not erotic in any way, and in fact is just this completely weird, dumb, pointless movie that I'm going to be putting into the F tier. Some bad acting, some unlikable characters, not even really a sexy movie at all. Like, I don't know why so many of these erotic thrillers that come out nowadays are just completely not sexy at all and uninteresting and boring. It's just an annoying and boring movie where I hate all the characters rather than just having simple indifference. It's true hate, and I don't know why horror movies insist on making the most unlikable characters. I mean, bad horror movies, I feel like, tend to have these really obnoxious and annoying characters that you cheer their death. This is something you find a lot in like found footage horror movies for some reason. They insist on making their characters as unlikable as possible, I guess because they don't have faith that they're going to make a good movie or like likable characters, so they're just going to make it so that you cheer for their deaths. But Bone Lake is just, I don't cheer for anybody, I don't care about anything that's going on, and it's just a really dumb movie. And so that's just how I feel about it. I feel like it's like a bad found footage movie, but it's not found footage at all. And so it's not great filmmaking, and it's disappointing because erotic thrillers, that would be cool if they were back in sort of style again, but this is just a really dumb one, and not one that I think is worthy of any much more discussion than I've given it already. So that's going to be F tier for that movie. Next up, we have Opus. This is a film that I'm going to be putting into the D tier. This is a movie that, to be honest, is kind of like a lot of the other ones that I've talked about already when I talked about Together and Companion. These sort of weird, fake, elevated, like it's fake pretentious horror movies. Like, they're not worthy of being so damn pretentious. And there is some cool elements from the movie, right? But those cool elements are just completely blanketed by the same bland, tropey A24 style horror filmmaking that permeates so many films that are trying so hard to avoid being treated less than seriously for their genre. So just what I would say is just lean into what makes you weird and unique and stop stooping to being a greatest hits run of other much better films, but executed much worse. You do have good performances by Ayo Edebiri and John Malkovich, so this movie is at least worthy of being in the D tier. And I do think that the director, Mark Anthony Green, has some potential and promise, because this isn't like the worst made movie of all time or anything. It's just kind of disappointing that so many horror movies just refuse to lean into being a horror movie and want to be these sort of weird A24 style things where you're just repeating what we've already seen. It's like, stop, you're not unique. Just make something different and more interesting, and you can do the same sort of style of movie, but just explore it in a more interesting and unique way, and they've refused to do that. And I think this is one that has some potential because of the cast, because of the solid direction at times, and there was a kind of interesting concept at its core, but it was explored in the most uninteresting way, and so for that reason, this is a movie worthy of the D tier. Next up, we have Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein, a movie I've been looking forward to for years. And this is really one of the biggest disappointments of the year for me, for sure, as this movie has to go into the D tier. It's really unfortunate and sad because I am a huge fan of Guillermo del Toro. I'm a huge fan of Frankenstein. It's one of my favorite novels of all time. But it is one of the biggest disappointments for me in recent memory from a movie. It's a Guillermo del Toro Frankenstein adaptation that I didn't like, and it even stars Mia Goth. It just feels like every other Del Toro film, but in the worst ways, maximizing his tendencies for empty showmanship, rather than the heart that made things like Pan's Labyrinth so good. It was a beautiful film with exquisite design poured into every frame, but it all leads to this very sort of reductive view of the source material that kind of just hollows it out and just feels like a cheap imitation, like you're not really fully exploring what you should be. You're trying to stay faithful, but you're losing out on so much of what makes it interesting by flattening everything down to fit into your own little tropes that you like for every single one of your damn movies. And I love you, Guillermo, but you really needed to kind of expand a little bit and not just kind of do the same things in the same sort of self-serving sort of filmmaking that you like to do. And I love Mia Goth, but she felt wasted here as well. And Oscar Isaac, his Frankenstein is just too damn unlikable, and the monster is too sort of, I don't know, he's too kind of viewed as like this, oh, this poor baby, like we don't ever see the monstrous potential that he really does have, that still we feel bad for him even in the novel, despite all the horrible things that he has done. And so I just feel like this is very close to being just this beautiful, amazing movie, but it just falls flat in so many key areas of the storytelling and of the characterization that it just left me feeling frustrated. This is a movie that should have been so much better than it was, and I know so many people absolutely adore this movie, and so I'm not saying that I'm going to hate it forever. I'm going to give it rewatches, and I hope over time I grow to love it, because I would love nothing more than this to be a really great movie. But to me, it's just like a hollow imitation of the novel that felt very close to the source material, but at the same time kind of made it very flat and very sort of fit into the Guillermo del Toro mold more than it actually being a really interesting story and exploring the philosophical themes in a way that felt fresh and unique. It felt just kind of like this thing that I've already seen a bunch before, but in a much worse way. So Guillermo del Toro is still one of my favorite filmmakers, but this is definitely one of the biggest disappointments basically of all time from a movie, one that I've been looking forward to for years. So this is unfortunately going to be in the D tier. Next up, we have Clown in a Cornfield. This was based on a young adult novel. I'm going to put it into the C tier. This was directed by Eli Craig, and I will say that it was very much limited by its young adult framework, but it's still a fun slasher movie with some good humorous moments. There's also some seriously unhinged performances by some of the adults, which are fun to watch. Now, there isn't anything great in this movie, but it's a decent enough time that doesn't overstay its welcome, and for what it is, I think it's a pretty solid horror movie, and so that's why I think it belongs in the C tier. There's not that much to say about it in my opinion, but I did have some fun time with it. Next up, we have The Damned, which is an international co-production. It's a folk horror movie. It's a sort of historical fiction movie. I'm going to put it into the D tier. Now, this one was a movie that, in my opinion, had some cool concepts and decent atmosphere, but ultimately tells a boring story that doesn't take advantage of what makes it unique. Now Thorder Poulsen, the director, has promise and potential and has talent that is on display throughout the movie, and there are some good performances and some good production design and things like that, but ultimately they don't take advantage of this, nor do they take advantage of the unique setting or the draugrs and all these things that they're using that are things that you don't really typically see in a horror movie. it just kind of ends up feeling boring and like nothing really happens, and you don't really care about any of these characters. It all just kind of feels empty, despite the decent atmosphere and some cool things that happen here or there. So yeah, The Damned is something that I don't really have too much to say about it, but I think D tier is fitting for it. Next up, we have Presence, which is sort of an experimental film by Steven Soderbergh. He is a director that likes to do all sorts of experiments, and this is kind of one of those ones that's kind of stretching the definition of horror a little bit, but it's a ghost story at its core, and there is some pretty horrifying elements of the story, so I'm going to put it in here for the purposes of this video. And I will say that it is a smart technical achievement with an interesting storyline, and it's a good, solid film where there really does feel like there's a real heart to it. Even with all the filmmaking experimentation, there's good acting, good directing. The idea of like following it from the perspective of the ghost is really smart and clever and allows for all sorts of fun filmmaking tricks, but that doesn't overshadow, I don't think, the storyline at the heart of it. And I think that that's really good filmmaking, and it's a horror movie that I think belongs in the B tier. It's one that I think is polarizing, but to me I liked it, despite it not maybe being like the best of the year or anything like that. Just a nice, smart little horror movie, a good film for sure. Next up, we have I Know What You Did Last Summer, and this is sort of one of those requels, right? A remake sequel thing, a legacy sequel, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to put it in the F tier, and I'll admit I never really liked the original to begin with, so there wasn't really much for me to latch onto or care, but I just felt like it was an unnecessary film that is stupid, unfunny, and uninteresting. And there's nothing to say about modern horror in here. Why does this film exist at all, and why am I supposed to care about any of this? I never liked the original, and I despise this movie. It feels very boring and generic, and just, like I said, doesn't have anything to say. I feel like Kevin Williamson was always very clever about the ways that he did his screenplay, and was always kind of in conversation with other horror movies. And this one just doesn't really feel like it has any of that. It doesn't feel like there's anything here that makes it relevant to be made today. I mean, I don't care about these legacy characters at all, and maybe that's my problem, but I really feel like this was just an unnecessary and stupid movie that doesn't work on really any level, and was just kind of a waste of time. Next up, we have another film from Osgood Perkins, this prolific filmmaker that's been making so many movies recently, Keeper, which I'll be putting into the B tier. This is a creepy, unsettling little horror movie. I don't think it's as ambitious as maybe some of his other movies, and that's why it maybe kind of caps out here. But to me, it really feels like a modern sort of successor to something like Ju-on the Grudge. It's a supernatural horror that leans on a sort of self-indulgent style of Perkins that just vibes with me, and there is some seriously creepy moments and unsettling atmosphere. I also have to give a lot of praise to Tatiana Maslany, who gives a really good performance and gives us enough of a reason to care about her character, despite it being such a weird movie. That is a nice, strong emotional core that I think really anchors a lot of the weirdness that we have around her, and I really love Keeper. Maybe not, like I said, in an S or an A tier movie, because maybe it's not as ambitious as those other ones, and maybe, I don't know, maybe the ending wasn't as satisfying as it could have been. Maybe there's some small critiques here and there, but I really do love this movie, and once again shows you how good Osgood Perkins can be as a director of horror movies. Now we're moving on to The Carpenter's Son. This is a religious horror movie featuring Jesus in his teen years, and I'm going to put that in the D tier. Now this is a movie that should be my jam. It has Nicolas Cage. It's a religious horror movie, which is one of my favorite, if not my favorite, subgenres. It's a weird movie about Jesus. I just love the concept, and some of the aspects do work for me. The soundtrack is strong. There are some genuinely creepy moments. Twigs was nice, right? Formerly known as Twigs. I don't really know much about her, but she was nice in the movie, I felt like. But I did feel like Cage was wasted, and I think the CGI snakes grew tiresome, and we didn't really get a satisfying ending. It's not nearly as sacrilegious as the controversy surrounding it would suggest either. Instead, we got just too many boring moments and too little horror to be satisfying. This is a movie that was very controversial because of the material that it was drawing from, but to be honest with you, it was really, like I said, it was not sacrilegious at all. This was actually kind of the most boring way to take this material probably that they could have. But of course people don't watch a movie before they condemn it as blasphemy and all this stuff. So I think that this is a movie that kind of probably benefited from that controversy a little bit and made it seem cooler than it was. and I still think there is some stuff that works in it, and like I said, it is right up my alley, but I do think that they wasted Nicolas Cage. They wasted really an interesting concept on a movie that just doesn't deliver on the horror as much as it should, and I think that's a disappointment for me, and I think that's why it belongs in the D tier. Next up, we have The Ritual. Now, this is like so many other exorcism movies that have come out that it's just like, I know they're all gonna bleed into my own memory. This is definitely worthy of an F tier in my opinion, because it's just a completely generic movie that doesn't stand on its own. It's trying to just be another Exorcist ripoff, another poorly executed one at that. It's just a generic, boring, and disastrous exorcism movie that goes nowhere and wastes good acting talent, right? You have Al Pacino in the movie, you have Dan Stevens, you have some other really talented actors and actresses, but it tries to like latch onto this based on a true story thing, which I think should just be banned for horror movies for a whole decade, because I don't know what it is about these types of movies where they feel like we can't stretch the truth a little bit now, and so we have to try and be like completely adherent while also making a completely boring movie, while also still not even being accurate to the true story. It's like, you don't have to make a boring movie. Look at The Conjuring, right? They're based on a true story, but they have gone completely off the rails and made a completely ridiculous movie, and there is criticism of that for sure to be had, but it makes the movies at least enjoyable. This one has none of that. It's just a completely boring movie with the same sort of tropes that we had in The Exorcist. It's just trying to rehash and reheat that old nachos. It's like, don't do that, okay? Try something different. Why does every exorcism movie have to fall in the same damn traps and not try and innovate or do anything different? I love the concept and the idea of exorcism movies, and religious horror is like my favorite subgenre, so I'm very disappointed by the painfully generic films that get pumped out year after year. It's like, is The Exorcist still really that popular that it can afford to get like 2 or 3 of these ripoffs every single damn year? So yeah, this is a disappointing movie. It's one that I think is just not worthy really of talking about much more than I already have. It's F tier for sure. It's definitely one of the worst horror movies of the year, and I'm very frustrated by its existence. So there you go, F tier for The Ritual. Next up, we have Black Phone 2, directed by Scott Derrickson. This is a movie that I'll be putting into the B tier. This is a movie that is kind of polarizing a little bit. It has some fans, it has some detractors. I'm always someone who's kind of had mixed feelings about Scott Derrickson. He's very hit or miss, but even when he does hit, it's usually limited somewhat by his own limitations as a filmmaker, and I think this is another example of that. This is a flawed but solid horror movie sequel that takes things in a new direction. It's more of a Nightmare on Elm Street sequel feel, but with less deaths and less feelings of like any kind of stakes to it. But there is some cool effects and set pieces, but ultimately it's just kind of a mixed bag that I feel has high strengths that move it into the B tier. So Scott Derrickson, Sinister 1 was a really good movie, but there was some limitations to it that kind of prevented it from being a truly great horror movie in my opinion. Meanwhile, he's had other movies, like I think it was Deliver Us from Evil, that were just painfully generic. Like, I don't know why he's just one of the most inconsistent horror filmmakers, or just filmmakers in general, that I've ever seen. Exorcism of Emily Rose, I thought was like an okay court drama, though I'm not really sure. There's like people that really love that movie, and to me, I just don't think it's worthy of the praise it's gotten in some circles, but I do think it's a solid movie. Black Phone 1 I thought was pretty good, and I liked a lot of aspects to it, though I think it also suffered from some of the limitations of Derrickson as a filmmaker, and I'm not sure why he has these limitations. He can't ever stay truly unhinged long enough. I think he tries to sort of make it an emotional family drama sort of thing, and that's supposed to be a core thing that we care about, but I never do tend to care that much about it. And I think maybe that's part of the problem, and part of the natural limitation is his limitations as a filmmaker of being able to have satisfying emotional payoffs to his characters. But he has really cool horror concepts that he plays around with, and he's really good at making like horrifying sequences that are really truly like just delightful to watch. Like the Sinister tapes, those homemade films that our main character in Sinister finds in the attic, are just truly unhinged and amazing and the highlight of the movie, whereas the other stuff kind of doesn't work as well. And I don't know what it is about Derrickson, but I think Black Phone 2 is a good film. It's obviously very derivative of Nightmare on Elm Street, like I said, but nonetheless it's a film that I think still holds up as a pretty solid sequel. I don't think Black Phone deserves or needs any more sequels after this, but I do think that this one was a nice little addition, even if I didn't really care too much what was happening to the characters. So B tier for Black Phone 2. Next up, we have Him, which there was a lot of discussion about this movie because a lot of people, because of the marketing campaign, thought it was a Jordan Peele directed movie, but it was just one that he produced, so you can kind of go in with a little bit more tempered expectations when you know that. And to me, Him was kind of a mixed bag. It's one that didn't really know what it wanted to do, so I'm going to have to put it into the D tier. It's a film with an interesting concept for a horror movie, and it has some cool moments, but like I said, it's just too confused about the type of film it wants to be to say anything too strong, and that makes it kind of a disappointing movie. Justin Tipping is the director, and I think he did an okay job in this movie, but to be honest, it kind of felt like he was trying to be an elevated horror movie at times, but then he was also trying to be this unhinged, weird, nightmare fuel, dream horror type movie at the same time. He was trying to be so many different things at once that didn't really work in a coherent vision. It felt like sometimes he was being kind of a lower brow horror filmmaker. Other times he was trying to have the Jordan Peele social commentary style of filmmaking. And then other times he was trying to be an A24 elevated cult horror movie sort of thing. None of it really worked or landed or stuck or was consistently applied throughout the movie, so the style just kind of feels haphazardly stitched together. Now, to be honest, there was some strong moments here, but they don't work in a coherent vision, and so that's why it's got to be a D tier. Marlon Wayans gives a really good performance, though, and I do want to give praise to him. I think Tyreek Withers is okay, and some of the other actors and actresses are okay in this movie, but Marlon Wayans did do a good job, and I want to give him his flowers because I do think that he should be appreciated for the performance that he put in here. And as a football fan, I'll just say that a lot of the things were inaccurate in this movie, though there was some sort of core things that kind of do, vibe with being a football fan or being a great football player. But it felt like someone who didn't really understand football or American football that well trying to make a movie about it, and it seemed like you don't really understand the soul of the sport to really critique it or to be able to make it into a interesting enough horror movie. So it just felt like sort of set dressing or just stuff that just kind of was to do weird other things that weren't really that relevant to the sport. So it's why even have it as a football movie to begin with, other than just to be kind of an idea to start off from. I just think that this was kind of a disappointing movie in that regard, and I don't know how much Justin Tipping knows about the sport or how much Jordan Peele cares about it, but it's pretty clear that this isn't really the most knowledgeable about the sport that it's trying to talk about, and I find that a bit disappointing for a movie that's trying to be about football and about a sport that is so dominant in American culture. Moving on now, we have Abraham's Boys, which is a sequel to the Bram Stoker classic novel Dracula. I'm going to put it in F tier. I was very kind of frustrated by the movie. I feel like it's a disrespectful sequel to its beloved source material. I do appreciate Jocelyn Donahue being in this movie, but she's just wasted, and this is a stupid, boring, and generally uninteresting film that does nothing, and when it does go somewhere, it's a painfully dull and stupid path to take. It's a movie that is the worst of all these sort of elevated horror movies, in that it just wants to be a slow burn, and then it doesn't want to do anything, and it doesn't want to go anywhere, and when it finally does go somewhere, it's so just dumb and predictable and just whatever, that it just has no impact, and I don't care about it at all. Now look, there is some beautiful scenery. The location they got for this movie is just absolutely beautiful, and so that is at least something to point out for at least some kind of praise, I guess. But that's just kind of wasted on this really boring movie. I don't really like Abraham's Boys much at all, and I think it's not worthy of much more critique than I've given it already, so I'll be putting it into the F tier, and that's about it. Now I'll be moving on to the final film here in this tier list, the 37th film. It'll be Death of a Unicorn. Now this is a movie that is also kind of polarizing or has some mixed opinions on it. I'm putting it into the C tier. I feel like it's a movie that's a fun, enjoyable film that is a bit derivative and kind of a boring take on something that should be so interesting like a unicorn. So it really is just yet another one of those sort of eat the rich horror movies, but to be honest, I think it's a fun version of that style of movie. And I think this has kind of been something that's kind of getting overdone a little bit in the horror space now, but it is a fun version of an eat the rich horror movie with good performances and some cool kills and moments. it feels like an Alien ripoff, and this film does suffer from a strong feeling of unoriginality, which it shouldn't really have when it's a film about a unicorn. How does that happen? But nonetheless, the cast with Jenna Ortega, Paul Rudd, and Will Poulter really carry this movie, and there's a lot of really funny moments. There's some brutal kills. There's just a lot of cool visuals as well, and Jenna Ortega, I think, is a character that we do care about to a certain degree, even though everyone else around her is just sort of the kind of flat, annoying, rich character stereotype that you get in most movies, though Will Poulter is a lot of fun as that stereotype, so it's one that's kind of like a perfect one for like a C-tier type of movie. It's one that isn't really amazing or reinventing the wheel, but it takes a lot of elements of other more successful movies, and it puts it all together and gets a good cast together and does some unique things here and there, but for the most part is a pretty derivative but fun little horror movie. So Death of a Unicorn, I think, is worthy of being in the C tier, and that's the end of me ranking the movies. So now we'll move on to some of the other things. So I just wanted to give kind of my general thoughts on horror movies this year. I think it was another strong year. We've been having a lot of strong years in a row. I don't think this one was as strong as years previously, but I've also been willing to watch a lot more movies that I wasn't going into them expecting them necessarily to be good. And I think that's why you see the F tier is just filled with so many movies. And the D tier too is just, I was willing to give more film shots this year, and maybe I won't next year because of how disappointing a lot of these movies were. But ultimately, I'm glad I got to see a really good mixture of horror movies this year, and I think that we really had some great peaks with stuff like Bring Her Back and 28 Years Later. There's a lot of attention the genre is getting, which I think is a good thing. And even though there's a lot of generic bad movies coming out, that's kind of expected in a genre like this, which gets so many movies every single year. So now I'm going to give my awards out for the best horror movie of the year and the worst horror movie of the year. So we'll start with the worst of the year. There is some heavy competition for this category. Basically everything in the F tier I could definitely see being worthy, except maybe a couple of them. I don't think necessarily maybe Rosario. I think it is F tier worthy, but I don't know if it's like the worst movie of the year. And there's some other ones, like Woman in the Yard, I think isn't really in contention. Neither is Megan 2.0, but there's so many other ones that I do think are in contention. But to be honest, the ones that really annoyed me the most are probably The Strangers Chapter 2, Witchboard, The Ritual, and Abraham's Boys. And I think the worst horror movie of the year, I hate it so much, and I think the anger that it brings me is probably what is driving this decision. But I have to say The Strangers Chapter 2. It's just such a pile of shit, and I hate Rennie Harlin's direction in these movies so much. The other ones, at least are trying something, maybe, even if they are painfully generic and boring and dumb. They're at least trying to do something that's not just hackish to such a degree as we see with Rennie Harlin in The Strangers Chapter 2, and I think it's a worthy winner for worst horror movie of the year 2025 from Justin Miller. So we also then have to talk about best horror movie of the year. There's only really two contenders. They're both in the S tier, and I think it's pretty obvious which one is my personal favorite, and that is Bring Her Back. This is probably one of my favorite horror movies of all time, let alone just for this year, so I think it's absolutely a masterpiece, and is one that's going to continue to hold up, I think, very well in the years to come. I think 28 Years Later is a very worthy, great horror movie, and if it was a different year, it probably would have a chance to win. But Bring Her Back, in my opinion, is just so damn good, and I love it so much that it's definitely a horror movie of the year for me. There's not really much of a discussion or a debate in my own mind, at least, about it. It's just so good. So that's my horror movie of the year. That's my worst horror movie of the year. Those are pretty opposite ends of the spectrum. I saw both of those movies in the theater, so it really shows you the kind of diversity of quality we get, the range of outcomes you can have when you go to the movies to see a horror movie. And I think that Bring Her Back is exactly the kind of peak of what you would want, whereas The Stranger Chapter 2 is like the lowest of the low of what you could expect when you go into a theater watching a horror movie. So yeah, there's my ranking, there's my tier list of horror movies that came out in 2025. This is my horror movie year in review video that I love to do every single year. I put a lot of effort and energy, and I watch a ton of movies to get ready for this, and I really do appreciate being able to talk to you guys, so thank you all for watching until the end. Please let me know down in the comments below what you think of my list, where you agree with me, where you disagree with me. If there's any horror movies I missed this year that you definitely recommended me watch, I would love to check those out. Pretty soon, going into next year, I'm looking forward to doing my preview video that I always do. You can look forward to that, where I talk about the horror movies that I'm excited about. Though, of course, when you look at this list, you see there was a ton of ones that I didn't talk about in my preview for this year. And that's what I love about horror, is that there's always movies you don't expect that come out and just really blow you away. And I think that's what I love about this genre so much, is there's so many countries that have great horror film industries that are thriving, and there's so many exciting young filmmakers right now, and even not young filmmakers that are still making really special and interesting work. So yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to 2026. I think this is a great time to be a horror fan. Thank you again so much for watching all the way until the end. Please leave a like, comment, hit subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications if you want to see my new videos when they come out. And again, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.